The thing about affection, real, meaningful affection, is that it isn't something you're automatically entitled to. That's a hard truth for a lot of people, especially in the modern world, where there's this sense that love, attention, and closeness should just be given out freely if you're a nice guy or if you're simply present. But that's not how it works. Women don't crave affection in a vacuum. They crave affection in response to something deeper. And what they're responding to, often subconsciously, is the kind of man you are, how you carry yourself, how rooted you are in your being, and whether your presence inspires trust, excitement, and safety. Now, this isn't some transactional exchange. It's not about ticking boxes to earn points for a hug or a kind word. That's not affection. That's manipulation in disguise. What it is about is recognizing that affection flows naturally when a woman feels emotionally secure with you, when she feels like you're not trying to get something from her, not begging for her validation, but instead you're simply being solid, present, and attentive to your own integrity. See, a lot of men go wrong by thinking affection is something they deserve just because they're around or because they've done a few good deeds. But if you approach affection like a vending machine, put in niceness, expect a reward, you'll find the machine is always empty. Women aren't responding to what you say nearly as much as they're responding to how you are. Your words can be perfect, but if your energy is off, if you're secretly resentful, needy, or unsure of yourself, it won't matter. It's the subtleties that count. It's how you look at her without demanding something in return. It's whether your touch is grounded or grasping, whether your attention is given freely or with an expectation attached. These things don't show up on a checklist, but they're felt immediately. That's where affection either lives or dies. You have to think about who you're becoming rather than what you're trying to get. That's the shift. When a man is deeply engaged in his own growth, when he's challenging himself to be courageous, to speak truthfully, to act with purpose, and to own his flaws without collapsing into them, that is when affection comes. Not because he demanded it, but because he inspired it. And here's the paradox. The more you chase affection directly, the more elusive it becomes. But the more you focus on showing up as a man worth being affectionate toward, not in a performative way, but in a genuinely integrated, self-respecting way, the more naturally it flows toward you. Women are incredibly attuned to emotional undercurrents. They can sense if your warmth is coming from strength or from a subtle plea for attention. So you need to ask yourself, are you craving affection because you're empty? Or are you offering something that invites it? That difference is everything. You don't get affection because you feel entitled to it. You receive it when a woman feels moved to give it to you, freely, without pressure, without force. And the only way that happens consistently is when she feels safe in your presence, both emotionally and energetically. And that means you need to stop trying to get affection and start becoming the kind of man who doesn't need it to feel whole, but who receives it because wholeness is exactly what he brings. That's the difference between a man who inspires affection and a man who chases it. Confidence, you see, isn't about puffing your chest out or speaking over everyone in the room. It's not about dominance for the sake of dominance or pretending to be invulnerable. Real confidence is quiet, almost invisible at first, but unmistakable once it's felt. It's grounded. It's rooted in something deeper than bravado or posturing. So it comes from knowing who you are, what you value, and refusing to abandon that no matter what kind of pressure you're under. And this kind of presence, this stillness in the midst of chaos, is magnetic to women. They don't just notice it, they feel it. Now, a man who has grounded presence doesn't need to chase. He's not trying to impress with flashy stories or constant talking. He doesn't scramble for validation or twist himself into what he thinks someone wants him to be. Instead, he's attuned to his own internal compass. He listens more than he speaks, not because he's unsure, but because he doesn't need to fill every silence. That silence, that calm, it speaks volumes. It says, I'm not afraid to just be here. I don't need to prove anything. Women pick up on that. They sense when a man is centered in himself. There's a kind of peace in it, a strength that doesn't need to be loud. It's the opposite of desperation. And in a world filled with noise and shallow attention seeking, that sort of presence is rare. So it stands out. It doesn't just attract attention, it invites trust. And trust, that's the foundation of affection. A woman won't open up, not truly, unless she senses you're someone who can hold space for her emotion, for the moment, for yourself. You can't fake that. It doesn't come from memorizing a script or mastering the right pickup line. It comes from doing the hard work of becoming a man who knows how to hold himself steady. And the steadier you are, the more she relaxes into your presence. Not because you demanded it, but because your energy gives her permission to let go. It's important to understand this. Women aren't craving perfection, they're craving realness, authenticity, backed by stability. That doesn't mean never showing emotion or always having the answer. It means being honest about what you feel without collapsing under the weight of it. That balance, emotional openness paired with internal strength, is what creates polarity. That's what creates chemistry. That's when affection begins to grow on its own, not as a reaction to your demands, but as a response to how safe and inspired she feels around you. Too many men think they need to win affection through performance, by being exciting or clever or constantly entertaining, but that's unsustainable. That kind of energy always burns out. What lasts is the kind of confidence that doesn't flinch under scrutiny, that doesn't shift when things get uncertain, the kind that says, I'll be here with or without your approval, because I know what I stand for. That's what draws affection. That's what holds her attention, not the fireworks, but the fire that doesn't go out when the wind picks up. And that kind of man is rare, which is why when a woman finds him, affection becomes effortless, not because he asked for it, not because he demanded it, but because something in her recognized that presence and responded without needing to be convinced. She doesn't crave affection for just any man. She craves it when she feels safe enough to stop performing and inspired enough to feel something real. One of the most destructive traps a man can fall into, especially in relationships, is putting a woman at the center of his life. Not because love or devotion are wrong, but because purpose must come first. Without it, you lose yourself. You begin orbiting someone else, trying to please, trying to adapt, trying to be what you think they want. And when a man gives up his purpose to make a woman his mission, what he communicates, often without realizing it, is that he no longer leads himself. And when he stops leading himself, the dynamic begins to unravel. See, there's a reason why historically the man was seen as someone who ventured out, who had a calling beyond comfort and immediate gratification. The reason isn't just practical, it's psychological. A man who is connected to something greater than himself has direction. He wakes up with intention. He suffers with meaning. And suffering with meaning is the only kind of suffering that can be endured over time without breaking a man. Because life is suffering. And if you don't orient yourself toward a goal, you're going to be consumed by that suffering. Now, when you make a woman your mission, when you pour all your energy into keeping her happy at the cost of your own development, she may appreciate it at first, but slowly, often unconsciously, she'll begin to lose respect because there's a subtle shift that occurs. You stop being a man who is leading a life of substance and you become a man who is orbiting hers. That's not inspiring. That's suffocating. And it creates a dynamic where she's no longer responding to you with affection and desire, but rather with confusion or worse, indifference. What she actually wants, even if she doesn't always say it in these terms, is to feel invited into something bigger. Right? She wants to feel that she's stepping into a relationship with a man who's going somewhere. And she wants to feel that being with you elevates her, not because you're giving her all of your attention and losing yourself in the process, but because your presence calls her to rise as well. And this isn't about being cold or detached. This isn't about pushing women away to prove how independent you are. It's about prioritizing the very thing that makes you trustworthy in the first place: your mission, your discipline, your drive. If you sacrifice that to try and maintain closeness, you'll destroy the very foundation on which real connection is built. Women crave affection from men who are emotionally available, yes, but also anchored in a sense of direction that doesn't vanish the moment they fall in love. And if you want her affection to deepen over time, not just survive, but actually grow, you have to keep cultivating that core part of you that existed before she came into your life. You have to keep building, keep struggling, keep failing and rising again, because that's the man she was drawn to in the first place. A paradox in some ways. You think closeness is built by giving more of yourself, more time, more attention, more sacrifice. But in reality, it's built by not losing the parts of you that she found compelling in the beginning, the parts rooted in purpose. And when you live from that place, when your actions reflect your mission, she doesn't feel neglected. She feels inspired. She feels like she's beside a man who won't crumble when things get hard. A man who doesn't need her to fill the holes in his soul because he's doing the work to fill them himself. That's when affection becomes something real, something alive, not because you begged for it, but because she can't help but give it to the man who's walking his path without apology. There's this strange idea floating around that for a man to be emotionally available, he has to be soft, overly vulnerable, even needy. That if he wants to connect, he has to break himself open and pour everything out, no matter how unstable or unresolved it is. But that's not strength. That's exposure without containment. And it doesn't make a woman feel safe. It makes her feel like she has to carry what you can't. Emotional expression is necessary. Yes, we're not machines, but there's a difference between expressing from a place of grounded awareness and offloading your chaos onto someone else. One shows maturity, the other shows you haven't done your inner work. And women can feel the difference instantly. The truth is, women don't crave affection from men who fall apart at every obstacle. They crave affection from men who feel deeply, but who've also built the capacity to hold what they feel. Men who can experience the full weight of emotion, grief, pain, doubt, even love, without becoming ruled by it. Because that capacity to stay rooted in the middle of emotional turbulence, that's what signals strength, not the absence of emotion, but the integration of it. If you're leaking your insecurities into the space between you, constantly seeking reassurance, constantly asking for emotional hand-holding, you're not bonding, you're burdening. And that will push her away, not because she doesn't care, but because she no longer feels protected in your presence. Affection doesn't grow in a place where she has to mother you emotionally. It grows where she sees that you can handle your own storms without needing her to fix them. Now, that doesn't mean shutting down. It doesn't mean pretending you don't hurt or hiding behind stoicism. It means you develop the range to carry your pain without collapsing into it. That's what it means to be emotionally strong. It's not about being unfeeling. It's about being structured. When you share from that place, she listens, she softens, because now she sees you're not throwing your emotion at her, you're offering it carefully, honestly, and with own. And what happens when a woman sees that kind of emotional integrity? She leans in. She gives affection freely. because she senses that what you're offering isn't a cry for help. It's an invitation to trust, to meet you in the middle, to connect. But connection without containment isn't intimacy. It's chaos. And no one, man or woman, can sustain closeness in that kind of instability for long. So you've got to ask yourself, when you open up, are you doing it because you want to be seen, or are you doing it because you want to be saved? Because those are very different things. And when you make her the solution to your inner unrest, you're putting her in a role she didn't ask for. She's not your therapist. She's not your emotional crutch. She's your partner, or at least that's what she's trying to be. The irony is, the more you build your internal strength, the more room you actually create for closeness. Because now your affection isn't a demand, it's a gift, and so is hers. And in that space where two people can stand strong in themselves and still reach for one another, that's where the real intimacy lives. That's where she craves affection. Because she doesn't feel responsible for your emotions, she feels safe sharing hers. Affection flows when emotion is carried with strength, not scattered in weakness. You can't expect to be respected, let alone loved, if you're unwilling to draw a line. That's not just true in relationships, it's true everywhere. A man who doesn't know what his standards are, or worse, who knows but refuses to enforce them, slowly erodes his own self-worth. And once that begins to happen, affection becomes strained, awkward, and eventually transactional. Because what a woman is responding to isn't just your kindness or generosity, it's your self-respect. When you set a standard, you're making a declaration about what you'll accept in your life and what you won't. That isn't arrogance, that isn't being controlling. It's structure, it's boundary. And without boundaries, there is no real relationship. Only negotiation, compromise, and confusion. The moment you start bending those boundaries, just to keep someone around, just to avoid conflict, is the moment you stop being trusted. It seems counterintuitive, but affection doesn't grow in a place where everything is tolerated. When a man tolerates disrespect, inconsistency, emotional manipulation, or even just low effort connection, what he's saying is, I'm more afraid of losing you than I am of losing myself. And that signals weakness. Not physical weakness, not emotional vulnerability, but weakness of spine. You'll see it often. A man meets a woman he really likes, and suddenly his values, his routines, even his friendships start to shift. Not because it makes his life better, but because he's afraid that being fully himself might somehow scare her off. But here's the truth. If you compromise your integrity to keep her attention, you'll never get her affection in any meaningful way. You'll just be managing a slow descent into resentment. What actually builds affection is when she sees that you hold yourself to a higher standard than even what you ask of her, that you don't say yes to things that drain you, that you walk away when your values are violated, not with anger, not with drama, but with clarity. That calm, unwavering clarity, it does something to people. It commands respect. And where there's respect, affection can take root. This doesn't mean you become rigid or unkind. It means you become solid. You can still be generous with your time, open with your heart, flexible with your plans, but never at the expense of your core. If you start shaping yourself around what someone else wants, even if it looks good on the outside, you're emptying yourself out on the inside. A woman wants to feel your strength, not just in how you protect her, but in how you protect yourself. When you say, this is who I am, this is what I allow, and this is what I walk away from, you're sending a message. I don't need you to validate me because I'm already standing on solid ground. And when she sees that, when she sees that you can walk away rather than abandon your self-respect for attention, something very powerful happens. She relaxes. She trusts you, not just to lead her, but to lead yourself. And affection grows best in that soil because now it's not forced, not extracted, not bought. It's earned. naturally in response to the strength of your stance. Affection follows the man who doesn't flinch when it's tested. One of the most misunderstood aspects of male strength is the idea that you always have to be in control, that showing care, softness, or appreciation somehow makes you weak. But that's not strength. It's fear masquerading as toughness. Real strength, paradoxically, contains within it the ability to be gentle, not soft in the sense of being passive or uncertain, but in the sense of being fully capable of force, yet choosing to act with restraint, presence, and care. That's the kind of strength that earns affection, not the kind that demands it. There's a particular kind of beauty in a man who's capable of intensity, yet moves through the world with calm precision. A man who could react, but instead chooses to respond. A man who could dominate, but chooses to serve something higher, his principles, his purpose, and yes, his relationships. That kind of man can look a woman in the eye, not with need or entitlement, but with honest appreciation for who she is. And in that space, affection doesn't feel coerced. It flows naturally. See, affection is not just about what you receive, it's about what you evoke. And you evoke it not through control or manipulation or force, but through your way of being. When you've done the work to become someone who doesn't need affection as a validation of your worth, but who can still give affection with clarity and strength, everything changes. Because now you're not operating from a deficit, you're not grasping at her attention to feel whole. You're full already. And from that fullness, you give, not to get, but because there's something in you that wants to express warmth, and that expression doesn't threaten your masculinity in the slightest. The truth is, women respond to men who are whole, not perfect, whole. Men who can be fierce when needed, but who can also be present, attentive, and emotionally attuned. That emotional range isn't a liability, it's a superpower. But only if it's integrated, only if it's grounded. Otherwise, it tips into chaos or weakness. So the task isn't to be a robot, nor is it to be overly emotional. It's to bring all of yourself, your strength, your focus, your affection into alignment. There's no power in withholding love just to feel superior. That's not masculine energy. That's insecurity dressed up in a cheap disguise. The man who withholds affection to keep her guessing is not strong. He's scared. And sooner or later, that fear erodes everything around him. Because real relationships can't grow in the shadows of power games. They grow in light. And light requires courage. You have to be brave enough to lead with strength and vulnerability. Brave enough to say what you feel without being controlled by what you feel. Brave enough to be kind without being weak. That balance, power and peace, firmness and warmth, that's the mark of a man who is truly alive in his masculinity. And when a woman encounters that, when she sees you can hold her with strength and speak to her with gentleness without losing your edge, without compromising your path, she doesn't just feel affection. She feels safe. And safety is the soil where affection thrives. So be dangerous enough to protect, disciplined enough to lead, and gentle enough to connect. Because a woman craves affection, but only when it comes from a man who can hold all of that without losing himself.